everybody. This is Bunny Pounds with Christians Engaged coming to you with another edition of our podcast, Conversations with Christians Engaged. Today, we are going to break fear off the church. We are going to talk about religious liberty, religious freedom with our friends at First Liberty Foundation. Lathan Watts joins us here today and really excited about having him. And I'll introduce him in a second. I've known Lathan and his family for years. And he is just great, as a great asset as the public affairs person for First Liberty. But we really want to, again, in this time of cancel culture, in time where pastors and churches and individual Christians are feeling afraid of what they can say or don't say, what is our legal rights as Americans? What is our first freedom in religious liberty in the Constitution? And how can we kind of break off the fear off of your hearts today is kind of what we're going after. So I hope you stick around for the next 30 minutes as we kind of discuss religious liberty and what pastors can do, what church members can do, and how we can talk about the issues of the day without being partisan, but talk about biblical principles, biblical values, and voting in that aspect. So our mission here at Christians Engaged is to encourage the body of Christ to pray for our city, state, and nation, to vote in every election. That's every election, not just the general election, but our city elections and our constitutional amendment elections, every election, getting a habit of being educated and voting. And then also to engage in some sort of political education, activism. It's time to engage with our culture. So with that, Lathan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Super excited. Here's a man who's got a law degree, has been involved in politics, working for my former boss, Congressman Jeb Hensarling, helping him get elected, working for former Governor Rick Perry. And now you're at First Liberty Foundation, working with our good friend Kelly Shackelford over there as y'all help lead the religious liberty cases for, thousands around the country, Lathan. So give us a little background of First Liberty and what you guys do.
Certainly. Again, thank you for having me. So First Liberty Institute is one of the leading religious liberty law firms and think tanks in the country. We exclusively practice in the area of defending religious liberty. That's the only kind of case that we take. We are headquartered here in Texas. We have a small office in D.C., but we handle cases all over the nation. And our mission is to restore and protect religious freedom for all Americans. We will defend anyone of any faith anywhere in America, so long as that person is simply seeking to live according to what they believe in a way that's consistent with the law and the Constitution. We will defend your right to do so. So we have a legal team in-house here at First Liberty, but then we also work with attorneys who are in private practice in law firms around the nation, and they volunteer to work with us on our cases. And that allows us to, as I said, handle a case anywhere in the country. We are also a nonprofit, a 501c3, so we're supported by donors around the country. And that allows us to do what we do and provide our services to our clients at no charge to the client. So every time we engage in a case, whether it's on behalf of an individual or a church or a ministry or whoever the client may be, they never get a bill for our services. And our work is it deals with a lot of different types of cases. People think religious freedom and they think the First Amendment and they think constitutional law, but your right to live according to your faith is certainly protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. That is your first freedom, your first liberty, so to speak. That's where our name comes from. But right. There are other situations, whether it be on the job, in school. There's other federal law, sometimes state law. Things like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Many states have a version of that as well. So the cases can tend to touch on several different areas of the law, but our work is solely to protect religious freedom and the right of people to live according to what they believe. And for people of faith, that conscience that they have is informed by their faith. But even for people who aren't particularly religious, they still have a conscience or a set of ideas that they want to live by. And the First Amendment, the religious freedom clauses protect that. Jefferson called religious freedom the right of conscience. And so that's really what it comes down to, is one of the most cherished rights in our Constitution. And I believe that it is there first for a reason, because our founders knew if you ever allowed government to invade that space between man and God, then there's literally no limit on government. If government can force someone to violate their own conscience, then what can they not do?
That is so good. And really the beginning of all of our other freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, everything else that we hold on to begins with religious freedom. And I love that you guys, do cases around the country. And it's not just limited to the Christian community. It's the Jewish community. Tell us a couple amazing stories. I know you guys work with veterans. You've worked with a football coach. Tell us some of the stories, a few of those, of some of the cases that y'all have worked on.
Certainly, yes. I think probably our biggest win recently, and maybe ever in the history of the firm, came last year when we won a Supreme Court case. Our client was the American Legion, and the case is American Legion versus the American Humanist Association. And the case revolved around a nearly 100-year-old World War I memorial right outside of Washington, D.C. in Bladensburg, Maryland. The American Legion, our client, initially donated the property that the monument stands on. And so we represented them in that case. The American Humanist Association had filed a lawsuit seeking to tear down this war memorial because it's in the shape of a cross. And the case really changed the way the Supreme Court analyzes Establishment Clause cases. The first two clauses of the First Amendment deal with religious freedom. Congress will make no law respecting the establishment of a religion, that's the Establishment Clause, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, the Free Exercise Clause. And for many, many years, the court had used a test to try to analyze Establishment Clause cases from a case called Lemon versus Kurtzman. And it had been known as the Lemon test ever since then. And it really created more confusion than it ever solved. And when the Supreme Court heard our case last year and issued their decision, by a 7-2 decision, they said not only does this war memorial, this Veterans Memorial, not violate the Establishment Clause, but really this test we've been using for so long is causing more problems than it's solving. And they announced in this opinion basically a new way of analyzing these types of cases going forward. And really, it's not a new way. It's really a return to the original intent of the Establishment Clause, but their opinion said, going forward, when we get a case like this, monuments, symbols, or practices that are in keeping with the history and tradition of this country now enjoy a presumption of constitutionality. So it was a major shift in how the court looks at these cases going forward. So it's already had a tremendous impact. Our client in that case, the American Legion, has identified some 3,000 memorials around the country that are safe now.
Amazing.
Things happen, since then, since that decision came out, where memorials or things that were going to be removed are now back because of that decision. So that's been a major victory for us. And then the case that you referenced is probably the biggest case we have going on right now, which is Coach Joe Kennedy up in the Seattle, Washington, Bremerton ISD. He was fired for taking a knee after football games at the 50-yard line and saying a silent prayer. It was his commitment to God that he made before he ever took the job as a coach. And he would tell you, if he was sitting right here next to me, that I would go to the 50, I would take a knee and just silently in prayer thank God for the opportunity to coach. And that's really all it was. Someone actually complimented Coach to his superiors, and that's how the school district found out about what he was doing and told him that he couldn't do it anymore. And we've taken that case all the way to the Supreme Court and now back again. I won't get too far down in the legal weeds, but he's now back at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and we're waiting we've filed our briefs with the Ninth Circuit. We're waiting on their decision again, and we'll see where that's going to go. But that's a huge case because it demonstrates how people have used fear of violating the Establishment Clause to actually violate the Free Exercise Clause.
Right.
And it's actually going to present, if it goes back to the Supreme Court, it will present the Supreme Court with an opportunity to undo another old decision that has been really made the Free Exercise Clause almost dormant. A case called Employment Division versus Smith. So we're proud to stand with Coach Kennedy. He's a great man, and hopefully we'll finally get this resolved for him very soon.
Well, that's a perfect example, Lathan, of the government coming in and telling an individual person what they can or can't do in their religious practices. I mean, we walk around as Christians, right? We're both believers in Jesus. And we carry Jesus wherever we go. So just because we're on a football field or teachers walking in a school doesn't mean that they have to leave their Christianity on the sidelines. And so it's so important what y'all are doing, because you're actually fighting for that coach's right to, thank God and honor him for a win in his own personal life, not putting that even on students or anybody else that he's touching there. I mean, wow.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what made the Ninth Circuit's opinion on this initially so troubling, was that they basically said, if you do anything where anyone can see you do it, and it is at all religious, then you are somehow violating the Establishment Clause. So
wow.
by their thinking, a reasonable observer who came to a football game and saw Coach go out to the 50 after it was over and take a knee, that person is going to assume that he is speaking on behalf of the school district and somehow establishing Christianity as the official religion of Bremerton ISD. It's nonsense.
No, nonsense.
That speech is not the school's speech; it's Coach's speech, and it's between him and God. And so that's why we're proud to stand with him, and hopefully, like I said, we'll have this resolved not only for him, but it will establish once and for all, hopefully, for people who work in school districts or any area of the government, that, as you said, you don't leave your First Amendment rights behind when you walk into a public school. You don't leave them behind when you go to work for the government.
Right.
As I said, we're cautiously optimistic that we'll get that resolved very soon for Coach and for everybody else.
That's great. Well, it's sad. I mean, we have in the Capitol, they have Bible studies in the Capitol. I mean, you have members of Congress, you have executive branch members. I remember hearing Governor Perry talk about their Bible studies, even serving as the energy secretary. But I mean, it's ridiculous that normal, everyday Americans are having to fight for their first freedoms. So let's talk about this, though. There's this idea of separation of church and state, and we're so afraid of that. Give us a little history and break that down and kind of break the fear off of people as it relates to, we're actually should be free from government, not the other way around.
Well, exactly. So the Establishment Clause, I mean, if you read it, Congress will make no law respecting the establishment of a religion. So our founders had just finished fighting a war with what was at the time the greatest empire in the history of the world. And that empire had the Church of England that people were required to support. And so they didn't want that here. So that's why they wrote the First Amendment, that there would never be an official church of the United States. So the federal government is not going to declare that this church is the American church. You can't be compelled, you can't be taxed to support a state-approved church. You can't be compelled to worship in one way or another. And that's really it. That's
right.
really what it boils down to. If you're not doing one of those things, you are not violating the Establishment Clause. The phrase separation of church and state comes from a letter from Thomas Jefferson around 1802, I think, to the Danbury Baptists in Connecticut. They had written a letter to him, and they were concerned about protections for religious freedom. And he said in his letter to them that the new Constitution, recently adopted, had in effect erected a wall of separation between church and state, meaning that the state is not to get into the church's business. It was never about keeping religion or faith out of public life. It's been distorted and twisted for so many years, as I said before, to the point where fear of violating the Establishment Clause has actually bled over into violating the free exercise clause, which is comes right after that. And so that's where it originally came from. It had been referenced in some Supreme Court opinions, and people have this sort of mistaken assumption that it's in the Constitution. It's not.
Right.
The First Amendment, as I said, was written to make sure that there was never going to be an official church of the federal government. That's basically it. The free exercise clause is about you being able to live according to what you believe. I mean, just look at the semantics of it, right? The word exercise implies and requires activity. I always say if all it took for me to have six-pack abs was just to believe with all my heart that I have them, well, then I would have them. Okay. But I don't, because there's a requisite amount of exercise, of activity that's required to get them that I'm just not willing to do.
Right.
But free exercise means living according to what you believe in all aspects of your life. It's not just the freedom to choose where you go to church on Sunday or how you worship God. It is about living according to what you believe.
That's so good. Here at Christians Engage, we're going into churches and we're talking to Christians all over the state of Texas that it's time to pray, vote, and engage. And Lathan, we get some pushback sometimes, going a little far, right? But we really believe that it's our biblical mandate that we have to be light and salt in our nation. And at the very minimum, we're praying, as 1 Timothy admonishes us to do, to pray for our government officials, that we're supposed to, not leave Jesus at the 100-foot marker of the polling place, but actually consider what the Bible has to say about the issues of our day and vote our conscience as it relates to biblical values. And then we're supposed to be the people sitting in boardrooms around our nation, having wisdom, being in the political field, being in education and media, etc., actually being salt and light in our culture and seeing change. But there's so much fear. And even pastors are afraid. They don't know what they can say or not say. And we need Christian pastors to speak out for the unborn, to talk about the issues as it relates to what the Bible has to say about marriage, about the unborn, etc. But yet they're afraid. So talk about that a little bit. What can pastors say from the pulpit? What can they do? And then what can they do in their individual life that's not related to the church as well?
Certainly. There really is no reason for pastors to be afraid about preaching what the Bible says on whatever the topic may be.
Right.
Our founders knew that you can't really have freedom without morality. That if you have freedom without morality, if each man is just free to do what's right in the sight of his own eyes, then the strong will inevitably oppress the weak. Or you take a look at it's the difference between our founding and our revolution and the revolution in France, right? Where freedom without that morality, things got so bad. Then the oppressed started calling for, we need a strong leader to come in and fix all of this. And then enter Napoleon, right? And you're right back to a tyrant. So, and the founders knew that is the role of religion in a civil society. Where does that objective standard of morality come from? It comes from the church. That was the intended role of religion in a free society. And without it, you will inevitably head back down the road to tyranny. So pastors, they don't have anything to fear. They should stand up and preach the whole counsel of God.
Exactly.
And Christians are expected, to live their faith in all aspects of their life, just as you said. There's a great quote. It's attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. It's hard to know if he actually ever said it, but it's a great quote anyway. That preach the gospel at all times. When necessary, use words. Mm. That's what we're called to do. And I know of First Liberty represents people of all faiths, and I don't really know of any religion that I'm familiar with that tells people, you can live however you want to, Monday through Saturday or Monday through Friday or whatever, as long as you show up and believe the right things. If you come to worship in whatever way, religion permeates the life of the religious,
right?
And it should be a part of everything that you do. And so there's no need for pastors to fear. First Liberty exists to defend religious freedom, and that includes churches and ministries and their rights to exist. And our ministry is to protect your ministry. You as an individual, you as your church, you as your faith-based nonprofit, you as a business owner who just wants to run your business according to your deeply held beliefs. All of those are protected. And First Liberty exists to help you. And if you have questions about this sort of thing, contact us. We have a lot of information on our website, firstliberty.org. There's a very easy tab at the top that says Get Legal Help, where you can tell us what's going on, and we'll get in contact with you and walk you through it. Or if you actually do need to be represented, you become a client of ours. I tell people all the time, hopefully you never need us, but
right.
But if you do, that's what we're here for.
Exactly. Well, and so pastors yes, as a 501c3 nonprofit, which we are, Christians Engaged, and you all are as well, and most churches are, they can't endorse candidates or be involved in political activity with church resources. But that does not keep the pastor from being involved politically in his own personal life, correct?
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah.
So he could be a Joe Blow pastor in Texas and endorse a candidate or endorse somebody for governor or endorse the president or whatever and be fine as long as he is not using church resources to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very simple, if you want to add a disclaimer that says this is my personal endorsement, it does not, reflect or should not be interpreted as an endorsement of my, whatever, denominational body. But yes, as an individual citizen, absolutely.
Right. And so there's a lot of fear going on about that. Now, talk about the Johnson Amendment. All these pastors are worried about the Johnson Amendment too, which is really just a Trojan horse. And of course, President Trump has just not enforced it. So talk about the history of that, and then where are we with the Johnson Amendment right now?
Sure. We get a lot of questions about this, usually this time of year, leading up to an election. The Johnson Amendment is named after LBJ. Was actually in 1954. He was in a primary race, and a couple of nonprofits endorsed or supported his opponent, and the race tightened. And LBJ added an amendment to, I think it was a tax bill back then, that basically said nonprofits can't endorse candidates, and that they could, risk losing their nonprofit status if they did so. The reality is, it is almost never enforced against churches and other religious nonprofits. The fear of it has actually accomplished what they wanted it to do. People are afraid of it, and so they hold back. But Congress could easily repeal this, and I think they should. If it was enforced against someone and they challenged it in court, my personal opinion is they would prevail on First Amendment grounds and the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and several other things. There are pastors every year who intentionally try to violate it. Some of them record their sermons and send them to the IRS, basically daring them to come after them because they want a suit, a lawsuit, litigation to try and get this thing struck down. Congress needs to repeal it, but people don't really need to be afraid of it. Most of the time when I hear it brought up, because I speak to churches sometimes, and I'll have people talk to me afterwards, and they'll say, somebody raised this as to why we shouldn't have you guys, or why the pastor shouldn't preach about this or that. And I tell them, usually it's somebody who just doesn't really like what's being said, and they want to sound smart. And so they bring out the Johnson Amendment as a way of saying, oh, I'm concerned about our tax status, but really they just don't like what's being said in church. But there's really nothing to fear. We're putting together actually a one-pager on the Johnson Amendment. It's going to be on our website soon. But if people have questions about it, again, they can contact us and we can get them information about it.
That's good. And you guys have a lot of resources actually for pastors and churches already on your website. So people can check that out at firstliberty.org. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's exactly right. So check out what they're doing. So how can the average ordinary believer, Lathan, make a difference in our culture? I mean, you've been involved in this for a long time. So just as a human being and a Christian, how do we make a difference, and how do we encourage our pastors to step out and be a voice? in our nation.
Yes, law and politics are always downstream of culture. If you lose the culture, you'll eventually lose in the courtroom and
Oh, wow. Yeah.
in the political arena too. So, people talk about a culture war or however you want to say it. I don't think that's over unless you stop fighting. And you don't have to be belligerent, and we don't call anybody to go out and try to get themselves in trouble so they can be a client of First Liberty.
Right.
It is just about, as I said before, it's about living your faith in all aspects of your life. When people of faith do that, life gets better for everyone. And the founders knew that, as I said. That's why they protected the role of religion in a civil society. Without it, I think we're seeing right now in our culture what happens. So, as you said, we're both Christians. We represent people of all faiths at First Liberty. Me personally, as a Christian, Christ never promised you that following him was going to be easy. He promised you that it would be worth it.
Right.
And I think we're approaching a point where Christians don't have the luxury of just quietly living according to what we believe. And we're approaching the point where somebody has once said, like, you will be made to care. Right? The other side is going to make you engage on some things. And there's plenty of scripture on how Christians are expected to live, in a world that, frankly, where the cultural orthodoxy is at odds with what we believe. Christ himself said, give to Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is God's.
Right.
Peter, fear God, honor the king. Remember who the king was when he wrote that. The Caesars in Rome used Christians as torches to light the gardens. They marched Christians into the Colosseum and killed them for sport. And Peter said, fear God and honor the king. Mm-hmm. Something tells me those Christians would have really appreciated the opportunity to have a say in who governed them. And we're going to meet those Christians one day. Are you going to look that Christian in the eye who was, marched into the Colosseum, or, was lit on fire to light the gardens of Nero, and say you couldn't be bothered to vote?
Wow.
And, more importantly than that, one day you're going to meet Christ himself. And the parable of the talents, if it tells us anything, is that we will be held accountable for what we did with the blessings God gave us. We are blessed to live in the freest nation in the history of the world.
Right.
And we're charged with protecting that. Now, the good news is that the gospel can flourish in any government. There's no government that can ever snuff out the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Right.
If that was the case, the absolute explosion of Christianity in China right now would never happen. I mean, that's one of the most repressive regimes in the world, maybe second only to North Korea. And by some estimates, China's on track to be one of the largest Christian populations in the world in the next 20 to 30 years.
Yes.
So, the good news is nothing can stop the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Right.
But as Americans, it's almost a uniquely American question. As a Christian in America, your government is founded on the idea that the existence of government, its reason for existing, is to protect God-given rights. So what is the Christian response to that? And you don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be a constitutional scholar. You do need to know enough about your rights to know when they're being violated, and know when to find people like us to help you. But we're called to live according to what we believe in all aspects of our life, and that includes our citizenship. Paul used his citizenship to advance the cause of Christ multiple times in the New Testament. He appealed to Rome as a Roman citizen. On more than one occasion, he was about to be beaten or flogged, and he said, "I'm a Roman citizen. You can't do this to me."
Uh-huh.
And he used that citizenship to advance the cause, and I think that's what it looks like for us in America, is using your citizenship to advance the cause. As I said, we're not telling people that you have to go out and be belligerent, about it, or it's just about living according to what you believe. And if the other side makes an issue of it, if you get to a point where the government is demanding you do something that you just can't do, the First Amendment was written to prevent that scenario from ever happening. That's the idea behind religious freedom in America. So if it does happen to you, that's when you need to find us. And we'll come in, at no charge to you, and we'll defend you, all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary.
Well, I know I feel better that I have y'all's cell phone numbers if I ever need you. But in reality, Jesus called us. Jesus was the perfect example. Here's a man that taught us to live the Beatitudes, right? He was meek. He was pure at heart. He lived out the Beatitudes in front of us. But man, he got angry in that temple and turned over the tables and said, this is unjust. This is wrong. And so we have a responsibility as Christians to be kind and to watch our communication tone and to be the people that bring people into the conversation, not push them away. But at the same time, we can't stop speaking the truth in love and speaking what the Word of God actually says about the issues. So that's what we're here at Christians Engaged to just encourage people. And hopefully this conversation today just kind of broke the fear off of people, that they can just be themselves. And even in the midst of a culture that wants to fight back and be belligerent and say, you can't say this thing, you can't identify yourself as a male or a female or whatever, that we can be confident that we have the Word of God behind us, and we also have the Constitution of the United States. And thank you, Lathan, for everything you guys do. Okay, we always like to end with one funny question, okay? All right. So you're going to think this is not really funny, but I like to know things about people's life. Like I have favorite things on my Instagram. So what is you and Kim's, your favorite fast food? When you're running around and you're busy with all these stuff, what's your favorite fast food joint to stop in at?
Probably Whataburger.
Okay. Gold stars. Mine's Whataburger and Taco Casa.
Right.
So with that, support the ministry of Christians Engaged. My new book, Enduring to the End, Overcoming Offenses, Bitterness, and Unforgiveness. This is very important for the political movement right now. And we're giving that away for free to anybody who gives on our website this month. And we're having a fundraiser with Rafael Cruz September 30th. And lots of special guests are going to be a part of that. It'll be online, so tune into that. Hear the story of Christians Engaged from the last year and where we're going in the next election cycle in 2021. We're super excited about the next year, and we've got a lot to do in the next couple months. Even in the midst of coronavirus, we've spoken at a whole bunch of churches lately and are booking almost every Wednesday night and every Sunday through Election Day. So if you would like us to come to your church, contact us at christiansengaged.org and take the pledge to pray, vote, and engage. We will send you text messages with prayers on Mondays at 5:55, remind you when early voting starts and on Election Day, and we will help you engage wherever God's calling you in this hour of history. So thank you, Lathan and First Liberty. We love you. And we will be talking to you guys soon along the trail. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you.